Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're settling in for something that feels a little different than our usual fare. We're continuing our journey through the AI Futures series by Jafar Humayun. And if you were with us for the last deep dive, you know exactly why we're doing this.
Yeah, it is a deeply compelling series, to say the least.
It really is. And I want to start right at the top with the framing quote that Humayun uses,
Yeah.
because I think it's just so crucial for keeping our heads on straight during this conversation. Uh, he says, AI Futures is not a forecast, it's a framework.
Right. That is the line that anchors everything we are talking about today. And that distinction is vital. We aren't here to look into a crystal ball and tell you what the stock market is going to do next Tuesday. We're looking at incentive structures, we're looking at the mechanics of how companies operate and how those mechanics are being well rewritten by intelligence.
Exactly. It's about understanding the rules of the game so you aren't surprised by the score. Now, just to catch everyone up, because this is a serialized analysis, in episode 12, we talked about the erosion of the predictable.
That's right. We discussed how vulnerability in the professional world has shifted. It used to be about prestige. You know, if you had a fancy title, you were generally safe. But we learned that vulnerability is actually about patterns. If your role is defined by repeatability, by predictable rules, it is being abstracted into code.
Right, regardless of whether it's a blue-collar or white-collar role.
Exactly.
Which brings us to today, episode 13. The title alone gives me a bit of a pause. It's called The Organizational Cascade.
It is a heavy title, I'll grant you that.
It is. And the premise here is that we're moving the lens. Last time we looked at the individual worker. Today we are zooming out to look at the structure of the company itself. And I want to be really clear up front because you know the internet is full of this stuff. This isn't a war on the middle-class narrative. We aren't here to induce panic.
No, absolutely not. This is a grounded analysis of what Humayun calls structural thinning. It's about cost mechanics. It's about physics, almost. If you change the density of the bottom layer of a structure, the whole shape of that structure has to change. The core question we are tackling today is, what happens to the shape of a company when the bottom layer is automated?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I think most people assume that if you automate the bottom, the top just sort of stays the same, right? You just have fewer people at the bottom. But Humayun argues it's way more complex than that. So where does this fracture actually begin?
It begins with what he calls the first wave, or the foundation fracture. And frankly, this is the part we have all seen coming for a long time. This is the absorption of the execution layer.
The execution layer, so we're talking about the doer.
Exactly. The repetitive rule-based roles, data entry, customer service, basic testing, standard accounting. These are roles that are defined by a strict set of inputs and outputs.
Right. And I feel like for years the narrative was, AI will help these people. It's a tool, right? A calculator doesn't fire the accountant. It just makes the accountant faster.
That was the hope. That was the co-pilot narrative that was so popular. But the source makes a really interesting distinction here. It says AI didn't just outperform these roles, it absorbed them. And it happened quietly. It wasn't this dramatic event where a factory whistle blew and everyone packed up their desks. It was actually quite elegant.
That word absorbed is really sticking with me. It implies that the task didn't go away. It ceased to be a job.
Precisely. Think about it. If you have software that can handle customer inquiries, process the data, cross-reference the company policy, and log the ticket without a human ever touching it, the job of a customer service rep or a data entry clerk isn't being done by a robot sitting in a chair. The job has dissolved into the infrastructure. It's just software now.
It becomes background radiation. It's just how the company functions.
Exactly. And the fascinating thing Humayun points out is how quiet this is. There is no mass layoff announcement that makes the evening news. It's just attrition. Roles aren't backfilled. The department quietly shrinks from 50 people to 5. The work is still happening, but the labor has evaporated.
It's seamless.
Yep.
And that's the foundation fracture. But here is where it gets really interesting. Because you'd think, okay, so the entry-level folks are facing structural redundancy. That's a massive shift, but it's efficiency. But Humayun argues that this absorption at the bottom triggers a reaction that travels vertically.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, think about how a traditional corporation is built. It's a pyramid. You have a broad base of execution workers, the people doing the data entry and the calls. Above them, you have a layer of people whose primary job is to manage those people.
The middle managers.
Yeah.
People making sure the base is doing what it's supposed to do.
Correct. The middle. And this brings us to the second segment of our analysis, the management ghost job.
Ghost job. That sounds intense.
It's a fascinating concept. The author asks a simple question. If the people doing the data entry are gone, absorbed by the software, What happens to the people who managed them?
Well, traditionally, middle management is the glue, right? They track performance, they optimize workflows, they write the weekly reports that put out fires when someone in accounting loses a file.
Exactly. They are the coordination layer. But here is the catch. Glue is only necessary if you have loose parts that need holding together.
Oh, I see where you're going.
AI doesn't need coordination in the human sense. AI tracks its own performance. It generates real-time dashboards that replace the need for those weekly update meetings. Co-pilots optimize the workflow instantly, millisecond by millisecond. So the tasks that define the manager's day oversight reporting optimization are also absorbed.
So the manager shows up to work, opens their laptop, and realizes there's no one to manage.
And that leads to what Humayun calls functional irrelevance.
Functional irrelevance. That's a stark term.
It is, but it's important to distinguish this from being bad at your job. These middle managers are incompetent. They didn't fail. It's just that their human coordination of human workers has lost its utility.
So it's not that they are bad managers, it's that there is literally nothing left to manage.
Exactly. If the execution layer is code, you don't need a human to stand over it and ask if it's going to meet the Friday deadline. The code just does it. Without a human team to oversee coordination becomes a ghost job. The middle layer dissolves because the thing it was holding together, the base, is gone.
It's like being a traffic cop in a world where all the cars are self-driving and talking to each other. You can stand in the intersection and blow your whistle, but the system doesn't need you anymore.
That is a perfect analogy. You are structurally decoupled from the flow of traffic. And this is where the cascade really picks up speed. Because if the base is gone and the middle is functionally irrelevant, you'd assume the safety lies at the top. The experts, the creatives, the engineers.
The skilled few, as the source calls them. Surely the people building the AI, the architects, they are safe. You can't automate the person inventing the product.
Well, this raises an important question about volume. Are they safe? Yes, in the sense that their role isn't entirely disappearing. But are they safe from the structural change? No. Humayun introduces the concept of specialist compression, or cognitive compression.
Compression, meaning squeezing.
Meaning you need far fewer of them to do the exact same amount of work. The source gives some stark examples. Imagine a team of 12 software engineers. In the traditional structure, you need all 12 to write code, test, debug, and deploy. You have front-end, back-end, QA, DevOps.
Right, whole squad.
With AI-augmented tools, that team of 12 might compress into 3 orchestrators.
3. So that's a massive reduction in headcount, but the output is the same or likely higher.
Exactly. Or look at UX design. Large teams of designers used to spend weeks iterating on mockups. Now you might have one solo designer using generative tools to produce those same iterations in an afternoon. Product leads become API integrators.
So the job changes. It's not about leading a brainstorming session or collaborating with a massive team anymore.
No. The job shifts from collaboration to interfacing with intelligence. That is the key phrase in the text. The remaining specialists aren't collaborating with humans. They are commanding the machine. They are in a race with synthetic productivity, the very tools they help train.
It sounds incredibly high pressure, actually. You aren't just a writer of code anymore. You're an auditor of code that is being written at lightning speed.
Correct. It's phenomenal for productivity, but it dramatically alters the headcount. If one person can do the work of 4 companies driven by competitive pressure are going to run leaner.
So what does this all mean for the person at the top? It means the pyramid isn't just getting the bottom chopped off. The whole thing is getting skinnier. It's thinning out vertically.
Yes, it's a vertical thinning. And this leads us to the part of the analysis that I think is the most provocative and perhaps the most challenging to sit with. Because usually when we talk about technology, we have a historical reflex. We say, hey, don't worry, technology always creates new jobs.
Right, the classic argument. I hear this constantly. The Industrial Revolution displaced the weaver, but it created the factory technician.
Yeah.
The computer displaced the typist, but it created the office worker. The internet created digital marketing. There's always a new rung on the ladder, right?
That is the historical precedent, yes. But Humayun argues that this time we are facing a scaling failure. We need to look at this through what he terms conditional economic logic.
Conditional economic logic. Okay, break that down for us.
Think about the new roles we hear about. Prompt engineer, AI ethicist, LLM fine-tuner. These are real jobs. But do they scale?
I see what you mean. When factories opened, they needed millions of workers.
Exactly. Factories created millions of jobs for technicians. Offices created millions of jobs for clerks. It was a mass employment exchange. These new AI native roles are niche. They are elite. They do not provide the mass employment volume needed to absorb the displaced middle.
So if you have 1,000 customer service reps who become structurally redundant, you might hire, what, 2 people to fine-tune the agent.
If that. And those 2 people need a completely different elite skill set. They aren't the same people. If new job classes require elite-tier cognition, but only employ a fraction of the previous workforce, then the job ladder effectively ceases to function as a mass social mobility tool.
That is a staggering realization. The source puts it this way: the staircase stops midair.
It's a very vivid image. There is no downstream class of mass jobs waiting to absorb the people shifting out of the middle. The ratio is fundamentally different.
So we aren't seeing a reorganization. We are seeing something else.
We are seeing a contraction event.
Contraction, that's the operative word here.
And the source material actually lays this out in a comparative table that really drives it home. If we look at the traditional structure versus the AI native structure, the differences are stark. Let's walk through it.
Yeah, let's do that because it visualizes the shift perfectly. First, look at the workforce.
Traditionally, you had a broad base, millions employed, high redundancy. In the AI native structure, you have a narrow core, high leverage, low redundancy.
Then look at management.
Traditionally, you had layers and layers of oversight, the middle we talked about. In the AI native structure, management is flattened into dashboards. The function of oversight is automated.
And finally, new roles.
Traditionally, new roles emerged by the thousands to absorb the displaced workers. Now it's a trickle of elite-only openings.
That is the structural decoupling.
Yes. The scaffold of the corporation is thinning. It's a cascade of efficiency that removes the need for human-to-human coordination. And I think what's fascinating here is that this isn't happening because of some grand design by executives to dismantle the workforce. It is anchored entirely in competitive pressure and cost mechanics.
It's incentives. We always come back to the incentives. If a company can run with 10 people and generate the same revenue as a company with 100 people, the market incentives will push them toward the 10-person model every single time.
Precisely. If they don't do it, their competitor will, and they will be undercut. It is strictly structural logic. And that is why Humayun emphasizes that this is not a reorganization. A reorganization implies we go back to how things were just shuffled around. This is a fundamental change in the geometry of work.
So if we look back at the flow of this deep dive, it started with the data clerks, the first wave.
Then it moved to customer support and project coordinators.
Then the managers, the people whose function was oversight.
And now even the senior talent, the architects and creative leads, are seeing their teams undergo severe cognitive compression.
It paints a picture of a disappearing floor. It's not just that the ladder is broken, it's that the ground floor is gone, and the whole scaffold is contracting vertically.
It is a profound shift, but again, understanding this framework is crucial. If you understand that this is a structural decoupling, you stop looking for the old patterns and you start looking at the new system. You start asking, where do I fit in a high-leverage, narrow-core organization?
Right. It moves you into strategy. If coordination is a ghost job, then you shouldn't build your career around coordination. You should build it around leverage.
You have to be the person who can interface with intelligence, not the person who organizes the people. You need to become an orchestrator.
But, as we just discussed, there are fewer seats for orchestrators.
There are, which means the competitive landscape for those seats is entirely different. You're either leveraging the AI or your role is functionally redundant.
And as we wrap up this deep dive into the organizational cascade, I want to leave you with a thought from the source material that really stuck with me. It's about the silence of it all. This isn't a loud shift. It's quiet. It's the silence of a dashboard updating itself. It's the silence of a contraction in headcount that looks on a balance sheet like a massive success.
That is the paradox of the AI era. Economic efficiency takes the shape of organizational contraction.
Wow. Economic efficiency takes the shape of organizational contraction. That is something to chew on.
Indeed. It's the systemic reality we are going to be navigating for the foreseeable future.
Well, if you found today's analysis intense, just wait. We are only halfway through the framework. We've talked about the erosion of predictability and now the contraction of the organizational structure. But what about the brain itself? What about the actual cognitive work?
That is exactly where we go next.
Next up in AI Futures is episode 14, The Cognitive Bottleneck. We're going to explore why even the smartest humans are being outpaced by AI-augmented super teams.
It's going to be a fascinating discussion. We're going to look at the physical limits of human processing.
I can't wait. Until then, remember, this isn't a forecast, it's a framework. Stay tuned. Stay curious.
And stay systemic.